Okay, so I'm going to call the February 8th meeting of the Ad Hoc Parking Committee to order. And I get a motion to approve the minutes.
Yeah, I would do that.
Okay.
I would approve the minutes. Should I? I guess I should. Do that.
Bob is going to take them when he gets here. So,
Okay.
oh, there he is. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, sorry.
No, that's okay. We understand.
You know what?
I do know why. It's totally okay. I'm sorry I delayed you even, a minute. So we were just starting asking for an approval of the minutes. Rob?
I'm good with this.
Okay, so I think we could say we approve. So,
I'll take
thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
So, because Rob can only be with us till 9:30, we thought we'd put off any kind of in-depth conversation about the first 3 items on our list and instead spend some time talking about residential parking. But is there anything, I want to say something briefly about the municipal lot parking ordinance, but is there anything about the parking controller hiring or the park mobile implementation that you want to say right now?
Just very briefly, parking controller, and the chief has been doing interviews, and the goal is to have someone for council to consider on the 17th.
Okay.
And then park mobile, I sent the signed contract has been sent back to them, and we're just starting out the implementation process, which will probably take 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. That's very exciting. Yeah. Okay, and then as far as the municipal lot parking draft ordinance, when I read through it yesterday, I realized I had some questions that I think are partly because I just don't know how these things work, and then also some things where I thought, well, we probably want John to make some changes to make them in line with some of the things we've done in the past with other ordinances. We talked with Samantha about that, and she said, well, this could be put off, and then I could send my questions to John and Samantha. I can copy you guys on this so you can see them. And then, so then it would come back to us, I guess, at our next meeting.
Yeah, and also I'm waiting on, I've asked Chief Gallagher for feedback as well, so I'll give him time to give us some thoughts.
Yes. So I would say if either of you had a chance to read it and have questions, you could send them to me.
On your
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. So residential parking. There are 2 things that I think would be good for us to talk about while all 3 of us are here. And one is the idea of our coming up with some kind of goalpost for us of when we want to be ready to take this to council, just so that we've got some kind of time frame in our own minds. So I think we have to think about that. The other thing is just this revisiting again the pricing that we've been thinking about for both the residential permits and the guest passes, because we had the conversations about those 2 separate things at different meetings, and I think we kind of need to now look at them as a whole and make sure that they work together, that we're not, that, we want to make sure that what we're doing is equitable, that it doesn't induce somebody to try to game the system in some way. And so I think we're going to look at that. Have any thoughts on timing and how we might determine that? Is that something that we might want to just kind of think about and talk about more at our next meeting, or you have some thoughts about that already?
Well, I was just thinking that maybe we should talk about the pricing.
Sure.
Because if, the sooner we get to a firm position on that, then we're ready. Then I think we're ready.
You do? Because see,
I mean, that's like a limiting step.
yeah, it certainly is.
Yeah.
But I feel like we have a lot of other things to
Right. We're not
flesh out.
totally ready,
too.
but
So, okay.
but
Do we have recommendations from
staff on pricing at this point? No,
Would
but
you
I think,
prefer that we discuss it?
well, I guess actually on Barbara's first question, I do think that, while we don't want to like limit the discussion, I do think putting some boundary on it is probably good as well. I mean, I would say maybe just intuitively from seeing these meetings and participating in other meetings, I feel like the April council work session might be a good time to share whatever, whatever all we have at that point, whether it's done or not. I think we'll probably be at a point to at least get some council feedback in.
Okay.
If that works, everyone.
To kind of share where we are
Yeah.
at the April session. And knowing, April work session, knowing that we may not have gotten through some of the more granular stuff that we know we're going to have to address. Because we have to set something up that can be administered too, not just, oh, this is our policy. So that that's going to help.
And then on the question of fees, I mean, I'll say this, I think everything I've heard so far, I don't have any particular issue with. The only thing that gives me any pause is just making sure that we can do the idea of the people with multiple cars doing like the higher pricing thresholds. My only concern with that is, and I'll give some thoughts to this because I'm going to put this out there with a huge caveat for anyone watching the recording or at home or anything like that, that like I haven't fully thought through, is that, generally the goal of fees is to reflect costs. And while I definitely agree that the elevated fees will reflect the cost of investing in the streetscape, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around if someone owns two cars versus one car, what sort of additional kind of costs that actually generates for the borough. But I do understand the policy basis for that. And so I might have a chat with the solicitor about the best way to accomplish that goal. But at a policy level, I'm on board with everything, given, I don't see any problems really. The fees, I forget the exact numbers, but for the fees we talked about at our last meeting for the S passes, I mean, those seem to make sense to me. The fees we've been talking about for the residential permits, a meeting or two back, none of that really seemed to cause any issues for me. So I guess that's my on the spot, well, not on the spot. I think that's a very fair question for Bob to ask. And I appreciate Bob asking that question of what I think about it. So thanks for that.
Okay. So I guess a couple of things occurred to me when I put together the charts, I summarized for you guys kind of where we are. Because I kept losing track in my head. Wait, what did we decide? So I decided to put it in a document. And I had also at one point looked into what Philadelphia does and what Lower Manhattan does, just as a comparison kind of sake. And so then I'd done that for the residential parking. And then when I was putting it in this chart, I said, oh, let me look at what they do for guest passes too, just to refresh everybody's memory on this. We have the escalating charges. We start out for the first permit of either $25 if you don't have a driveway or $50 if you do. And then we go up to $50 for second, $100 for the third, and $200 for the fourth. Then this is for
Can you repeat it again? 25 with, 50 without. That's what the second car was.
50 for both, 100 for the third, and 200 for the fourth. So when I looked at Philadelphia also does the rising prices. They just don't have with and without driveway. They go 35, 50, 75, 100. So they don't, their third and fourth permits are not as expensive as what we could propose. Lower Marion looks to me like, now I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like you can only get a permit to have 2 cars on the street, but I'm not, it doesn't sound like you can have them on the street at the same time. It's really hard to, it says a permit for residents and you move the tag from one car to another or something. So I'm not quite sure how it works. I'd have to talk to somebody who lives in Lower Marion who has them. And it's just $20. And then it doesn't look like you can get a permit for a 3rd or 4th. But they have short-term and long-term parking in their municipal lots. And they have a lot of municipal lots, so I wonder if that's how they provide for folks who don't have driveway space to park more than 2 cars. So, we're very different from what it looks like Lower Marion's doing on their website. But they're very different from us in that they, as I said, they have a lot of municipal lots that people can. We're somewhat in line with Philadelphia, not totally, but we have maybe different issues than they have in setting those. So that's for residential parking. And then when I looked at guest passes, we talked about a daily fee of $5, a weekly fee of $15. In Philadelphia, you get 5 daily passes for $35. It doesn't seem like they sell them singly. And they don't seem to have any provision for anything more than just 5 passes at a time. Lower Marion, I couldn't even find anything like that. So I wonder if that's where they send you to the short-term parking. So the guest pass is kind of interesting. It feels like a concept that's not used much in this area. So it's
Yeah, I was gonna, apologize.
Sure.
I was gonna throw in there, with the parking areas in Bucks County that I'm familiar with, whether it was living in, or even Montgomery, living in, Phoenixville, Lansdale, and Doylestown. I don't remember, definitely not in Doylestown. I don't think in Phoenixville or Lansdale, there is a guest pass concept. It's either you're a resident, you can park on the street, or you just have to park on a metered spot or paid parking lot. Like you said, we're different how reliant we are on on-street parking versus municipal lots.
just don't have a lot of this. So when I look at these 2 things together, I'm thinking through both what you spoke to, Manager Bryant, the cost of enforcing the program. And I certainly know the $5 fee that we're charging right now doesn't make up the cost. I have no idea, how much of, is this getting us to the right level? Is it taking us above it? Are we, I just don't have a sense for that. And so, I want to make sure that what we were doing was capturing the cost. And then if we wanted it to go over that we had a reason that we could stand behind well for why we wanted to go over that, especially when we're talking about initially only impacting the folks that currently live on regulated street. So I think we need to think about, are we comfortable with that, doing that? Because that's like an initial, oh, we're asking you to pay more because we have this aspirational goal that we'd like to get to someday. Should we be thinking about, do we do that all at once, or do we start out with some, yes, Mom?
I'd like to suggest that we do a little work outside committee to just sort of work on the criteria by which we, what does parking cost? Staff can provide their reasons for why they think parking, for what costs about our parking system, and we can provide our reasons as we see them for the cost of parking. We can see where there's overlap and agreement. We can see if maybe, if we can all agree on these areas. But I know that in the cost of free parking, that and the discussion that's going on kind of nationally around the true cost of parking, there's a lot of different ways to do that analysis than to say what parking costs, because, you know, there's incalculable maybe cost to the environment.
Sure.
And so we want to be able to reflect that fairly and accurately for the residents of Narberth, because I think they're asking us for that.
Yes, and I'll play devil's advocate and say, if I live on a regulated street, I might say, hey, I don't want you to throw all that on me right now if you're not gonna throw it on everybody else in the borough.
Yeah, well, that,
And so that's where I'm wondering.
This is where we have to determine what the cost is. Like,
Yes,
the cost has to be shared equitably
yes,
among people who do park on the road,
right,
right?
Right.
Not just, shouldn't just burden the people who have 2 hours on it.
exactly.
Which actually dovetails with the question I emailed you about overnight parking.
I know,
Yeah.
but it also impacts I mean, we've already made the decision that we are going to roll this out in 2 phases, that initially the new fees and whatever else we might want to change along with this is only going to apply to the current regulated streets. And then someday down the road, we might add some or all remaining streets. That's and my point is just, when we do this initial go-round, should we be setting the fees in a way that is going to feel, if I lived on a regulated street, inequitable to me? Because you're not making everybody who wants to park on the street pay park on the street. And if we feel, no, that's the right way to go, that's fine, but we need to recognize that we have to be able to explain that and get council on board with that, because I don't know that all, you know.
I would argue that it's the right way to go, because we're providing a service to residents who live on 2-hour streets, because we're providing them the opportunity to find a parking spot when they come home from work, and they can out and about. It's reserving parking for people, and so that has a value. And sure, not everybody lives on a street that requires 2 hours of it. And that's a condition of, you know, that we each choose, to some extent, we're choosing where we live. And I think we covered this ground years ago when we said, like, look, if you're a family with 3 Humvees, you're probably not buying a house in Narberth because there's no place to put them. And so, you know, we do choose our lives to fit our needs. And if you have a need to have unlimited free parking, you know, sure, you may be living on a 2-hour street now, but you've been paying for that. You knew your road was regulated when you moved in. No, I mean, we haven't established new 2-hour zones anytime recently.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You know, it's not like there's no surprise here. We're just doing something that's long overdue, which is making sure that the cost of parking is reflected in the fee. Anyway, that'd be my argument. And you're the one calling it a burden.
Well, only in the sense that if you know, if I'm looking at this and saying, okay, well, what's the cost of enforcement? What's the cost of maintaining the street? And saying, well, that's what I'm willing to pay. I live on a regular street right now. I don't want to pay extra for streetscape improvements that you're not making other people in the borough. That's the place where I could see some pushback.
Are we at those fees yet, though?
I don't know. That's the kind of the question I was
say we
at.
go back to
Yeah.
Richard's suggestion, and we work offline
Yeah.
without a committee to kind of really look at, because we're going to have to justify it. I know the staff probably end up ultimately having to justify it because if it goes to court, it would be John Walker would have to justify it. So like, why don't we kind of
Sure.
get that?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. How do you suggest we do it as a committee member outside?
Well, I would go back to the cost of free parking and look at how other communities justify the cost of parking in their communities. You know, we're not the first people to ever do this.
But that was the book you shared with us earlier, right? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh,
The high
that's
cost
right.
of free
I
parking.
haven't looked at that in a while. Thank you for
I
reminding
think
me
there's
about
other
that.
communities that are really
Yeah.
far ahead of us in that
Yep.
regard. We could maybe borrow some of their thinking. At least some of their, you know, maybe some of this has already been tested in the courts. Clearly, Philadelphia has a phased they have a tiered system for first, second, third, fourth cars, so they must have some justification in their municipality. It's not just a random thing.
No,
And so, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know how we do it. I think we go do some Google research, et cetera, and and find out if there are if this has ever been tested before. If that guy's ideas, the high cost of free parking ideas, have been tested anywhere already, and what the outcomes were of those. Yeah, I mean, but also I think the municipal staff they have clear ideas of what it costs. I mean, it just is what it is. Like we have a controller's car and a controller's salary. It takes time to take the coins to the bank and collect them from the meters and paint the lines and stripe the spaces and all of that stuff. Is like, there's no knowns.
good suggestion, thank you, Bob. Thank you for reminding me about that.
Yes, I think, by the next parking meeting, we could get that information together, in terms of what it actually, an estimate of what it costs to borough,
And then maybe we could then look to your concern about, like, do we want to burden,
Right.
I'm gonna use that word, do we want to burden the people who only live in 2-hour zones with all of the cost? I would say, well, probably not.
No.
We actually have to, maybe we have to build in assumptions about the second phase. And what the cost would be for permitting borough-wide. When we do put regulations on other streets. Not that we necessarily have to put 2-hour regulations on every street. We can still do a borough-wide permitting without those kinds of rules.
Well, but that, we were always hoping we could not do 2-hour zones everywhere.
But it's not a requirement to have it requiring permitting.
No, it wouldn't be. No, of course not. No, I think when we talked about borough-wide at times, we talked about having no 2-hour zones, and just everybody has to pay to have a parking permit. On street parking, so that. But
May I read this one sentence, because this will just for Michelle and Samantha and all of our listening. Just the high cost of free parking is an urban planning book by Donald Shoup, dealing with the cost of free parking on society. It's structured as a criticism of the planning and regulation of parking and recommends that parking be built and allocated according to its fair market value. So there's a specific rational way of determining the fair market value. But what we have to find out is that recognized? When these things are tested? Or not? It's a nice idea, but is it really something we can use to create policy?
So,
Right.
So I had one other thing that thought that occurred to me as we think about the level of the fees for the residential permits. If during this first phase, the fee is set at a level that somebody's like, well, I'm not paying that. That's way too high. I'm gonna just go park on an unregulated street, which, they can do that. But are we squeezing the toothpaste tube? Remember that analogy, are we is that going to cause some other blocks to come to us and say, now we want a 2-hour zone on our block? Because we've got all these people parking on our block.
I think if we move to the second phase pretty quickly, I don't know, I can't quite imagine the timeline. How quickly could we move from the first phase to the second phase? Because if it's pretty quick, then a lot of this will be resolved. Because now everybody's paying for pretty much the same, right?
I think the thought process on why it had been proposed to do it that way was just to make sure that if there's anything we didn't think about or any kinks in the plan that it could get worked out before we expand it to everywhere. But I would agree, I would hope that after, month, 2 months, we'd see what anything we need to tweak and then could make it borough-wide, if the committee is amenable to that, to avoid that, the 2 problems we talked about, that people will try to circumvent it by parking on unregulated streets, and that then people living on unregulated streets are getting the benefits of on-street parking without paying for it.
Right.
Okay. That all makes sense.
So are we then operating on the assumption that we will roll out part 2 expeditiously? like, we're gonna sort of work it out and then roll it out.
Yeah, my opinion would be if, as soon as we know that these changes we're talking about work in the areas where we're already enforcing it, I would feel comfortable with and would like to then expand it to, borough-wide, yeah.
And so kind of say the whole borough is a 2-hour zone in a sense, and that, you know, you can park without a permit for 2 hours on any street, and otherwise, if you want to park longer, you need a permit.
So this is what I wanted,
Sure.
I think there's a discussion here. I don't see the purpose of creating a whole borough as a 2-hour zone. I think the 2-hour zones are what the 2-hour zones are, but I see a purpose in creating the whole borough as a no overnight parking zone without a permit. Because that kind of, then you have control. Then you're actually providing residents assurance that there aren't just people parking on their street, but using the street as a parking lot while they do whatever, like either to store their car.
No overnight
Long
parking
term.
without a permit.
Without a permit, yeah.
Yeah.
But that way you eliminate all of the cars that are on the streets just being parked here in Marlboro.
Right.
Why? Because they're just using it as a parking lot.
Right.
And that's not, I don't think that's a small thing. I think that's actually happening to some extent.
Yeah.
People see cars sitting out in front of their houses for
Yeah.
weeks and sometimes months.
Yeah.
And they don't know who the car belongs to. And they know that car is like taking up a spot on the street.
Plus there are people who we know who owns that car, they live here, and they leave it parked for 3 months.
Well, it's their child's car while they're college.
Yeah, and
whatever.
so I'm like, you should be paying to use that space then.
Right, because it's the same space that kids might be using to set up a basketball net and
Right,
play.
exactly.
And they have just as much of a right.
That's right.
Plus you know. there's-
Yeah, I like that, no overnight parking without a permit. So that could become the standard.
Yeah,
And then layered on top of that, some streets are 2-hour.
yeah, if that's not too complicated, but
I don't.
I'm curious as to why you.
That's up to, I'm like, that's where I'm like, going,
I
okay.
think it's a really good, I totally understand like where you're coming from on that idea. The only caution I would have is, I'm not saying we could, I'll just need to give some thought as to how enforcement would actually work with that. And then I know, Chalfont Borough actually, at least back when I was in that area, had a ban on overnight parking. And maybe I'll reach out to them and see how they handle that and how that's worked out. And then I can, let the committee know about that.
Okay.
I mean, I guess because it's only overnight, you'd only have enforcement, maybe for a few hours in the middle of the night, right?
Well,
And for those areas of the borough that have no overnight parking, and if you're there without a permit, at least you need a guest permit if you're going to stay overnight. Or if you're a resident parking on the street, you need a guest permit.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
thank you for joining us.
Yeah, okay, I'll see you all soon.
Yep.
Anyway, I wonder why did they do it at Chalmont, do you know?
Yeah, I'll have to find out. It's something I never really asked them about when I was working over that way.
I had a thought, but it's gone. It's just important. Yeah. For me, I think to keep in mind the enforcement aspect to make sure we don't create something that's too onerous. Oh, that was my enforcement thought was, if we say, well, there's no overnight parking without a permit, how realistic is it to think that in the middle of the night, parking controller would be noticing that? Well, they're not going to be, but neighbors are going to notice. And if they start seeing it, I mean, this is always something people can report. It's like overgrown bushes on the sidewalk. We don't have somebody walking around looking, somebody who works for the borough walking around saying, where is it? What do we need to send a notice to? We depend on residents to report that. So,
So you're like a resident can call the police, and the police can come over, scan the plate and see
yeah.
if they're permitted or not.
That's true.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily have to have and then if it really became an issue, you could have a part-time controller just for a few hours, a couple times a week.
Yeah, if you felt like that was necessary, but I think people usually know when there's something going on their block that's not
But I mean, most of the blocks that aren't regulated with 2-hour streets don't have that many cars on the street.
No, they don't.
They really don't.
No, it's-
Although it depends.
It really kind of depends on who's living on the block.
I also wonder if it creates an option for people who do live on Harvard Ave then to obtain a permit, because they would then be obtaining a permit for a non-2-hour block. And so that then they naturally have a place to seek parking. And they won't be boxed out by the people who are parking using Harvard as a parking.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a thought, yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's a thought, but can you elaborate that thought?
Yeah, so again, yeah, I guess I consider myself a member of the group that's able to kind of think about the life experience
I
people
think so
have
too.
to have.
I think so too.
So I guess what I would say to people in Haverford Ave is, if you work during the day, you come home, I mean, you can certainly park on Haverford Ave at the metered spots because they're only, enforced until a certain point at night. Now, the caveat being if people are like, out at dinner or whatever, or if it's a weekend, it's going to be, a bit decent bit busier there. So I think that's something we need to think about then. Okay, is that if we mandate you have a permit for overnight parking, it is similar to the concern of people parking on unregulated streets. Are people then just going to go park where the meters are overnight? Or would that be an enforcement thing on the metered spots as well? And if it was, then yeah, I think you'd have to open up some sort of permit opportunity for residents of Haverford Avenue. So again, just because I lived in Doylestown, I know it best, had to park there for 5 years. I think I mentioned before, they had a thing called yellow band meters, which is certain parking meters you could get like a permit for to park at without paying the meter. And I guess I'd almost envision we'd have to almost do like, if we made the whole borough regulated parking and no overnight parking, I feel like we would have to do something for people on Haverford, whether it's some sort of like meter permit that will allow you to park at the meters outside of the posted hours if you're a Haverford Ave resident or something like that.
Why would they say just get a parking permit and park where, in the area where there's not 2-hour parking? I'm assuming there's no parking in the business district because we need to run the sweeper in the morning, that kind of thing. But so like I don't see why we would ever allow overnight parking in the business district just because of housekeeping.
That's true.
But why couldn't someone living on Haverford Avenue get a parking permit and park on one of the streets that's not 2 hours, the way they do now, essentially? That's where they park now.
True. I guess
It's not a different accommodation, really.
Okay, so yes, sorry, I got a little confused. So we're talking about a system in which the entire borough would be regulated, but some areas of the borough people could park in for up to 2 hours with no permit, as long as it's not overnight.
Yeah, I would just say, like, I'm just imagining, like, the regulation is no overnight parking in Harvard, borough-wide, and then there are also some 2-hour zones, right? Which we currently have. Like, it's no different than it is. It's just that if you want to park on the street overnight in an area that's not for 2 hours, anywhere, you need a permit.
I guess I think of it in terms of like keeping the enforcement kind of straightforward as like areas with parking meters. And I would envision like the phase 2 we're talking about, and that the entire borough, the entire on-street parking in the borough that doesn't have meters will all follow the same regulations, whether it's 2 hour or not, whether it's overnight parking or not.
If they just see it all being the same.
Yeah.
And then in the Nelson Nygaard study, they recommend 3 zones so that somebody in zone 1 doesn't go park in somebody's zone, zone 2 spaces. That was just to kind of keep some basic separation.
Yeah.
So that everybody on the north side doesn't end up parking their car close to downtown, for example.
Right. I think that, well, I get that. I think that I don't know, I guess I'd be interested to see if that actually would happen or not.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people are gonna park, are gonna wanna park by that house as opposed to running the risk of like losing out on a spot by that
Yes.
house.
Yes, we make that assumption, and I've sat through many meetings with the public, like with 20, 30 people out here, because, in discussions about parking. Unfortunately, these are from the days before we had video, and I don't even know if we have such good meeting minutes, but we have these meetings, and this is where Barbara got the term the toothpaste phenomenon. The residents describe that, not the council people. The residents describe, we're, like say, we, the people of the 200 block of Dudley Avenue, are here tonight because like the people on the 100 block of Dudley Avenue, their guests and extra cars are like coming up on our part of the street because we don't have regulated parking and they do. So do you see what I mean? And so that was the toothpaste phenomenon. And then they regulated the 200 block we regulated the 200 block of Dudley Avenue, and it squeezed out onto the other, and like sort of it just kept going like this thing. For some reason it got quiet.
We haven't had any.
Because I think it's interesting thing to discuss is for some reason it got really quiet when we stopped like doing the fee? We're still enforcing
$5, right?
but people are still getting permitted and it's still being enforced. It's gotten, maybe it's the pandemic. I don't know. I think maybe there's just fewer cars in Marlboro.
Even though people don't believe that, but
I mean, there's been a downtrend. Like it was like years ago, there were a lot of families with many children, and like everyone in the family had a car. Right. So like it would only take a couple of families on my own with 2 or 3 kids, all with everybody having a car, to just park up the whole block. And we don't see that happen. You don't hear about that much anymore. Families have gotten smaller. There's more single, and maybe the demographics are a little different. Yeah.
Can I read from the Nelson Library report about the 3 zones? And I don't feel like they give a complete explanation of why they were posted, but they said these zones were created based off the profile of parking generators within different sections of the borough. For example, in Zone 1, south of the railroad tracks, the primary parking generator and challenges may stem directly from commuter parking, as opposed to Zone 2, which is the railroad tracks to Stewart/Woodbine, which is primarily commercial and potentially commuter driven. In contrast, there are few parking generators other than housing within Zone 3, which is the northernmost reaches. So they were kind of looking at it, I think, saying, well, what's generating the parking needs? And they created those 3 zones with the idea that there would be different enforcement hours, which we talked about at our last meeting, and said, we don't think that that's necessary to do different enforcement hours, especially given how much they were upping the enforcement from what we currently have.
I guess.
So I'm not sure that the 3 zones be even, given what they were saying, I'm not sure how to reflect the commuter aspect from it.
I guess so. I mean, I guess the fear that like, because we, the recommendation from the chief and I is, 10 to 6 everywhere. I mean, I guess, are we really worried that people are going to be parking, especially if we didn't allow overnight parking without a permit? Are we worried that people are going to park especially if we do it that way? Will we really worry about people parking after 6 over by the Central line? Or would we worry if we didn't have zones? Would we really be worried that someone who lives on North Essex is going to go park down by the septic station overnight? I think Bob's idea of not allowing overnight parking without a permit, I think is probably the easier solution to deal with it as opposed to implementing zones.
I mean, I think what they were trying to eliminate were people driving to the train and parking around, you know, in the streets around it, north and south, because you can choose one or the other depending on where you're coming from, and just leaving your car there all day.
And both Barbara and I lived far enough away from the train station for years. I did for years, and I would get to the city. And,
There were times I drove.
there were times I drove. And like, you know, so we both used the meters on Windsor that like allow you like 10 hours of
Right.
parking,
Yeah.
which seems just really silly use of
Yeah, oh, yeah,
municipal space close to the shopping area.
Yeah.
You know, for commuters, like who actually live in the borough.
I know, yeah.
But you know what? Even though there were a zillion available spots on the south side, like that wasn't available to us, even though
Because they were 2 hours out.
residents.
Right.
Right, and if you talk to, when we've listened to people on the south side talk about their concerns around parking and commuter parking, historically, there's been a lot of upset about, you know, anybody parking up the streets. Like they like it to be open. Like they just like it that way.
I guess I would say, yeah, I mean, we made, eventually we made the entire borough a regulated area, and we made the entire borough, no overnight parking. I guess like from the concerns I'm hearing, I do feel like that would shut down a lot of that.
Yes, it makes it too.
I guess I don't see how, because you could still park during the day. You could still then, you know,
That's right, you can still park just as you can now.
except where there are 2 hour zones.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, because right now, for 2 hours, you have to like park on whatever street that you, live on. I mean,
You could, in the old days, like, you could, if you wanted to commute to Center City by train, you could drive over to Rockland and park on Rockland.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or parts of Chester.
yes.
Chester, you know, or places that aren't in Chestnut, places that are not 2 hour, don't have 2 hour parking.
Right.
And I don't see the problem with people using that, except if they're just storing their car
Well, no, so,
for days on end.
okay, maybe I'm hearing something that wasn't being said. When we're talking about this rolling out to the whole borough, are we saying that we would keep the existing 2 hour zones where they are and then add on, we need a permit to park on the street overnight? Which, if you live on in a 2 hour zone street, you're already getting a permit to park on the street overnight. So we're saying, okay, the whole borough has to do that. Or are we saying, no, we're getting rid of the 2 hour zone thing. You need a permit to park on the street overnight. And if we do that, then does that mean we don't need guest passes unless the guest is staying overnight? It's like,
So what I was suggesting is leave the 2 hour zones alone. And just if you want to do something borough-wide to cost share and also to help the general situation of people parking, implement borough-wide parking permits for people who want to park on the street overnight.
and how does that work from an enforcement standpoint? Because that's the thing that I think is.
Like you pointed to it, like residents know, and the police could scan plates, and you could have some enforcement if you needed it on even a part-time basis, limited part-time basis.
Does that
yeah,
work? I mean, I know.
I think that is the least hassle way of doing it, yes, that I can think of, unless it's
My only thought about that is that there's no like push to get people to get permits then. You know, if they're comfortable that, you know, they're parking overnight, they parked overnight for years, everyone on the block knows them, no one's gonna report them. There's no need for them to get a parking permit.
Well, they would be required though by the rule to get a permit.
Well, they have
So-
enforcement.
So it sounds like we can just rely on the, obviously we would put signage up on the streets, but I think to Michelle's point, we probably wouldn't be able initially at least be able to rely 100% on neighbor reports. We probably would have to do some targeted enforcement of it.
What else would be, I mean, Michelle, maybe I don't have an accurate sense of compliance, but it's possible, like I just assume like, oh, everyone will comply. Like that's kind of my default. So I might not see that like actually if we were to send out a notification to everyone in the borough saying like, if from now on, if you're parking on the street overnight, you're gonna need a permit, here's the application, and this is how you get it online, and if you have a guest, they're gonna park on the street, you're gonna need that. I guess I assume like, well, you know, good 95% of people are gonna comply. But I hear you saying like, maybe not, like, and I think you have some pretty, I think you have some pretty
Well, people know
grounded
now,
experience with that.
people know now, if they're parked on a 2-hour zone, whether they have a guest or not, they need to apply. So because they know they're being enforced. So overnight, I don't know if it's new, they never had to get parking permits before. I don't know.
Yeah, there will certainly be like a break-in period.
Oh, yeah, and a big educational period.
Yeah.
I guess the only problem that this would solve, but again, I don't know if this is really a problem or not, is again, yeah, someone who lives on the north side of the borough, for example, could come and park, with the model we've described, could come and park on the south side of the borough to make use of the septic station. And they would be allowed to do that under the system.
That's right. As long as but isn't almost all of the south side a 2-hour zone? Isn't that what we've heard? It's already almost.
Yeah, but it,
Rob said there's like one street that's not.
Yeah, not completely. However, if you have a permit, you have a permit.
yeah, that's.
Oh.
So
Gotcha,
therefore,
gotcha.
Barbara Portner is driving from,
Yes.
you use you an example. That's your chair.
There were times when I was so loaded down with laptop work papers. I had to drive.
I totally empathize.
I needed a lot of drive.
So here's the example, I think that,
Yeah.
it's Barbara Portner's driving from like the 500 block of Conway, I know,
That's okay.
whatever, the 500 block of Conway, and then she's parking on the 300 block of Windsor in order to go all day long to go to, and then like someone who is working at the post office can't park in that spot because Barbara Portner drove there from the 500 block of Conway,
Right.
so now they're parking wherever.
Or vice versa,
Great
someone who
idea.
lives on the south, okay, now I'm starting to understand the zones better, because I can also see the example, someone who lives on the south side, however, they want to go like, you know, out to eat in downtown or whatever, they come and park on, I'm just making, you know, the 100 block of Dudley, for example.
Yeah, it takes somebody's space who
Yeah.
wants to park there for their, coming home from
All right, so here's what I'm thinking then. I'm thinking then that we make the rules the same across the borough, but right now we restrict people to a specific street. Maybe instead of, maybe either we keep the street restriction or we do 3 zones.
Yeah, and I think that's where Nelson Nygaard actually did some thinking about it. And they based their analysis on what they observed in terms of like what they
Yeah, now we're actually talking through it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm okay with splitting, and from an enforcement standpoint, I'm more comfortable with the idea of splitting the borough into these zones. I'm still queasy about the idea of each zone having different enforcement rules, but I am much more comfortable with the idea of at least,
Yeah.
because we already do the street restriction thing now, expanding it at least to a zone concept, I think would work fine.
And that also addresses some of the other criticisms that Nelson Nygaard had of our system, as they said, like, it's too complicated, there's way too many zones, there's way too many districts to enforce. You don't want to have different rules in different areas because it's just too complicated for the residents to track. Like
Yeah.
simple is best, like you said, simple is better.
I mean, I think just in this like conversation here, I think we did put a lot of ideas together. I think I don't know, to me, that sounds like a really good framework to build off of.
So let's see if we can summarize it before we lose it.
Yeah,
So I think what we're saying is, guys, correct me if I got it wrong, we would keep the existing 2-hour zones the way they are, but we would allow you to park anywhere in your
so.
1, 2, or 3 zone.
Right.
So number one is divide, as per Nelson
Yeah.
Nygaard, create 3 zones.
Yeah.
And actually, can we allow the Nelson Nygaard report to do that work for us?
Yeah,
Why not?
We should.
agreed, yeah.
I don't remember remember that there was any real concern about to see what the parking.
Well, I mean, again, I would promote it as the borough is actually expanding people's parking options.
Yeah,
Because
well,
right now,
that certainly
you can
is.
only park on your street, whereas with this proposal, you'd be able to park within your zone.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
true.
Yeah,
And
right.
it even gives people with a driveway some permission in a way that the flexibility, I would say provides the flexibility.
Sure.
So we would keep those restrictions. And then we would add a regulation for the entire borough that says so for the non-2-hour zone spots, really is what we're saying, that there's no overnight parking without a permit. And that gets us to this desire to, one, have people who have driveways use them for as many cars as they can that they're willing to do. And then if they don't want to do that, they got to pay because they're parking on the street. It captures the cost of more of the cost of maintaining this open space, this ability of on-street parking. And it helps prevent the person who doesn't even live in the borough parking their car for some extended period on our streets. And also, as I said before, captures the cost of somebody who does live in the borough, is basically using that spot as storage for their car because they're not moving it for months at a time. So that's a good use of this program that helps capture that cost. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm seeing a particular issue we need to come back, talk through again, which has to do with Hanford Avenue.
Yeah.
I'm using Hanford Avenue as a shorthand for the whole entire, for people who live on the in the business district. And I'm excluding properties that have been restricted from permitting.
Yes.
Whatever.
Well, yes.
Like, we don't need to talk about that.
No.
But I'm just excluding that.
Well,
I just have in mind for addresses that would be provided a permit, would be allowed to apply for a permit. There's an issue there because now you're saying to those people, you can park anywhere in your zone, which is in zone 1. Now they're able to park in restricted 2-hour areas, which means that a street like Forest Ave, the 200 block of Forest Avenue becomes very desirable.
right.
And already you've got it's already being utilized by the residents of 200 Forest.
To me, this is all the one thing that we haven't spent time talking about yet is multifamily dwellings. And I think that's where we'll get into this. What do we do for multifamily dwellings? Because there's never going to be enough on-street parking.
Well, I'm not talking about multifamily dwellings. I'm talking about
That's what the apartment building is.
Well, but most of the apartments, for example, on Hanford Avenue, say on the north side of Hanford Avenue, there's like one or two above the stores.
yes.
They're not
Yes,
really.
yeah,
They're not really.
Well, it's the two different types, it's the smaller and then the large.
And I think it's all like a question. It's like, where do those people who don't have the ability to park overnight on their blocks go at night?
Right.
And I think we need to create some kind of carve out, and that might have. My hope was always that we would do kind of like your Wells Fargo in Doylestown example, that we could have a public-private partnership with large lot owners in the borough, have some kind of mutually beneficial arrangement, and that the Hanford Avenue people could park there overnight. They move their cars during the day, but at least they have overnight facilities, or even or even municipal one.
Yeah.
But even though we've created no overnight parking there.
Right, and that, the intent of no overnight parking is just to keep people from leaving a vehicle for an indefinite period of time.
Well, and also as a way to capture the cost of parking for people who currently don't live on regular streets. It's both of those.
So, would we say that residents of Hanford Ave would be eligible to get an overnight parking?
They have to.
Yeah,
That's what I'm.
They would have to be, but then where do they put their cars? Like, do we allow, like, sort of with our current, in the way that
Like the
the
park
garbage
meters are.
Really?
But then what about sweeping the streets?
Well,
You know, about keeping the downtown, like sort of housekeeping. That was the reason we never, I believe that's the reason in the past that there was no overnight parking.
really, there's no overnight
It was about that.
I
It was
see
about-
cars on
It
there.
was about housekeeping.
I-
Well, it's not allowed.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess, again, drawing heavily, I want to talk to, that's gonna be, I'll talk to, our public works manager about that. Yeah,
I mean, in a lot of municipalities, they do like one side,
that's,
you know, no parking, one side every Tuesday,
Yeah.
that's how they run the
Well, and,
sweeper.
yeah, and
But
it, yeah.
I think we were sweeping daily.
I think we are.
We are sweeping, which is actually really nice.
Yeah.
You know,
Really
the
great.
towns, when we sweep daily, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I apologize, here it is,
There we go.
staff, it is 10
Well,
o'clock.
no, I was, I was looking at the time, and I was like, we do need to go, and I think, we have, this is great, and I think when we come back, we're gonna wanna talk about guest pass a little bit, to make sure that all fits in with what we've just decided, and then the when I say multifamily dwellings, I'm thinking how Nelson Nygaard laid it out, they said for units less than 6, and then for units 6 and above, and I think we wanna kind of look at that and talk through those and make sure that we're happy with where we're going. The fact that they created those two and had different recommendations for those two categories, I think it makes sense for us to take a look at that, so we can do that. Okay, thank you, everybody. This was really, really good.
Yeah, good to see everyone.
Yeah.